I only wanted to sit with my son on his wedding day. The hall in Charleston had that polished hush expensive rooms carry. Glass chiming softly, a string quartet working through something light. White tablecloths spread like fresh snow under chandeliers. Magnolia leaves braided the railings. Waiters moved in pairs, their shoes whispering over the floor. I didn't need much. I just wanted my chair at the family table, a place to rest my knees and watch my boy begin his life. My name card waited beside Daniel's. His boutonniere had already wilted a shade at the edges. I reached for the back of the chair the way I have for years, careful, deliberate. Before my fingers closed, Sophie was there, bright as a flashbulb, palm on the wood, voice sweet enough to make the nearby aunties sigh. "Here, let me help," she said, and I nodded because that is what you do when you're 62 and trying to keep peace. I bent my knees. Weight shifted from heel to thigh, the slow descent of a man who measures each step. The chair slid forward just enough for my body to commit. Then it was gone, snatched clean away like a pulled tablecloth. Gravity did the rest. My back hit the gleaming floor with a crack that sounded too loud for the music behind it. A dozen conversations died mid-laughter. Somewhere a fork clattered. Champagne slopped over a rim and ran toward me in a thin, shining line. Pain brightened my shoulder hot and fast. The breath left me with a grunt I couldn't swallow. For a heartbeat there was nothing but the ceiling, white and far, and the quiver of chandelier light. Then the room found its voice. Gasps first, a nervous laugh. "Oh!" Sophie's cry rose above it, perfectly pitched. She dropped to a crouch, fingers hovering over my sleeve, eyes wide and glossy. "He slipped," she told the watching faces. "Oh, bless him, he slipped." I'd known slippery floors. I'd known stiff knees in damp weather. This wasn't that. I planted my palm, felt the cold through my skin, and pushed myself upright 1 inch, then another. "Take it slow, sir," a waiter murmured behind me, but his eyes were already on Sophie, as if her distress needed tending more than my bones did. Across the table, Daniel stood half-risen, mouth parted, as though someone had pressed a hand to his chest and asked him to stay. "Careful now," someone tutted, not unkindly. Not kindly either. Phones glinted and lowered. One woman dabbed Sophie's cheek with a napkin like the bride had been the one who hit the floor. The quartet fluttered to a stop and then carried on because that's how these things work. Music pretending nothing had happened so the room could pretend with it. Pushed my shoes under me, and with a breath that scraped a little, stood. The ache in my shoulder had settled into a steady throb, the kind a man knows he will carry through the night without complaint. Sophie kept her hand on the back of the chair. My chair, like a nurse guarding a patient. "It's these floors," she said to no one and everyone. "So slick. He must have lost his footing." Her voice shook just enough to be admired for its courage. "I'm fine," I said, testing the words. They felt plain and useful, like a tool, well-worn. I took hold of the chair, set it square myself, the legs scraping an honest sound over the varnish. I didn't look at Sophie. I looked at Daniel. His eyes slid from mine to the floor, then back to his wife, and in that tiny motion I felt a door close I hadn't known was open. "Folks, let's keep the toasts on schedule," the MC called. Cheer tucked into each syllable the way one tucks a napkin to hide a stain. A couple of bridesmaids clustered around Sophie as if she were the fragile one, cooing. A man I didn't recognize gave me a thin smile like a warning ticket. "Watch yourself, friend," then turned his shoulder. The attention in the room flowed toward the bride, away from the man who had fallen. I eased down, slowly this time with the chair under me, and found the tablecloth bunched under my hand. The linen felt like paper against my palm, the weave familiar in a way that opened old rooms in my mind. Another table, another chair, wood under dirt-scarred fingers, sawdust on a shop floor. I let the door close before the memory could fill the space. This wasn't the hour for the past. It was the hour to breathe and sit without taking anything else down with me. A guest near the bar tittered, trying to dislodge the tension. "Age gets us all," he said to his glass, not quite softly enough. A cousin's child stared openly, then was tugged by the wrist and scolded in a whisper. I straightened the napkin on my lap, wiped the trace of champagne from my cuff, and kept my hands still so they would not shake. Keeping still has a way of turning a body invisible. It also keeps it from breaking into pieces. Sophie leaned toward Daniel, one hand on his forearm, and whispered something I couldn't hear. He nodded without looking up. The string players slid into another melody. Plates began to appear. People decided, as people must in rooms like this, that it would be easier to move forward than to look down. The chair at my back held steady under my weight. That should have been comfort. It felt instead like a question. What is a seat, after all, but a way of saying you belong? Eyes returned to me here and there, the quick flicker strangers give when they're measuring which story to keep. Clumsy old man or cruel trick. I knew which one would fit better with the linens and the centerpieces. I knew too how a story told often enough becomes a wall you can't climb. I sat inside my body, inside my breath, and watched the first bricks being laid. I did not speak. There are times when words fix nothing and only spill more glass. I placed the knife parallel to the fork, squared the plate to the edge of the table, and allowed the calm to grow around that small order. It is a stubborn thing, dignity, quiet, but it holds. Ed thought to himself, this was not just a fall. During the toast, Sophie raised her glass, her smile sharp as glass. The reception hall glowed brighter now, chandeliers flooding the space with gold. Laughter spilled from every table, glasses lifted high as if the air itself could be toasted into joy. I sat at my seat, the very chair that had betrayed me earlier, my shoulder still aching, my pride sore in ways no one could see. Music softened to make room for voices. The master of ceremonies called for toasts, his microphone squealing once before settling into clarity. Sophie was on her feet before anyone else. She held the microphone with practiced ease, the stem of her champagne glass balanced delicately in her other hand. Her dress caught the light, but it was the glitter in her eyes that demanded attention. To family, she began, sweet as honey, though her smile cut like a blade. The room hushed, waiting. I could feel it before she said it, a tightening in my chest, the way a man feels the storm in his bones. She told a story, my story, about the year I lost my job, how I had come home with hands still stained from grease, unable to explain to a 6-year-old boy why Christmas gifts were fewer that year. She bent it, twisted it, smoothed it until it gleamed, not as sacrifice but as comedy, laughter already bubbling from the guests. He made it sound like an adventure, living lean on purpose. Can you imagine? Her eyes scanned the room, daring it to laugh with her, and they did. Glasses clinked. A ripple of amusement spread. And suddenly, my son's childhood hunger was a punchline. Something rose in me, not anger. Anger is fast. This was heavier, older. I lifted my glass, cleared my throat. The microphone was passed to me, hesitant, as though already expecting a mistake. My hand was steady as I took it. My voice, at first, was calm. Sacrifice, I said, is not a story for laughter. It was survival. It was love for my son when he needed me most. The room shifted, some eyes lowered. Daniel's jaw tightened, torn between his wife's charm and his father's truth. Sophie's face didn't falter. She smiled even wider, the way a fox smiles when cornered. I opened my mouth to say more, to set the record straight. And then, silence. Not the heavy silence of shame, but the sterile one of cut wires. My words died because the microphone had gone dead. The MC stood near the soundboard, his hand casually covering the switch. "Thank you, sir," he said brisk, as though I had overstayed my welcome. Laughter erupted again, forced, eager to move past discomfort. I lowered the microphone slowly, the weight of it useless now. Around me, faces blurred in a haze of mirth. I could feel the humiliation creep across my skin, hotter than the overhead lights. First my chair, now my voice, piece by piece, stripped. I stayed standing a moment longer than necessary, letting the silence around me become mine even without amplification. Then I placed the mic gently back on the table and sat. Inside, my heart pounded not from rage, but from the clarity of realization. They weren't just mocking, they were erasing. Across the table, Sophie tilted her glass toward me. Her lips curled, a smile no one else noticed, sharp as the one she began with. She looked straight into my eyes and held the gaze. Sophie glanced at Ed, her smile challenging. Hours later, my phone buzzed. Family group notification. The house was dark except for the lamp by my armchair. Charleston's wedding laughter had faded to memory, but its echo still pressed against me. I sat stiff, shoulder throbbing, the silence broken only by the tick of the wall clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. The phone buzzed again, insistent, lighting up the room in short, sharp bursts. I unlocked the screen and there it was, the family group thread. At first I thought it might be Daniel sharing photos of the reception, the kind of snapshots that carry a day forward. Instead, a video clip filled the screen. Sophie had posted it, her name bright at the top. I pressed play. The moment unfolded again. Me reaching for the chair, the sudden absence beneath me, the heavy crash of my body against polished floor. Only this time, the video was cropped to catch only the fall, trimmed of context, trimmed of her hand on the chair. It played on loop, cruel in its simplicity. Beneath it, she had written, "When nerves get the better of you." Laughter emojis bloomed in the comments. Cousins I hadn't seen in years chimed in with jokes about age, about clumsiness, about grandpa pratfalls. Every beep of a new reply felt like a slap across the face. I scrolled, hoping for at least one word of defense, one hand extended through the screen. Then I saw Daniel's name. Just a like, no words, no shield. His silence hurt more than the fall itself. I sat back, the phone heavy in my palm, heavier than any wrench I had lifted in the garage. The light from the screen washed my face pale, as if erasing me one pixel at a time. Placements grew, piling into a digital chorus of mockery. "Careful with the dance floor, Ed. Hope the Medicare card's ready." Even the emojis seemed to laugh louder than the people at the reception ever had. In the glow of my living room, I was no longer father, veteran, worker. I was a caricature, an old man stumbling in endless replay. I closed my eyes. The sound of my body hitting the floor replayed in memory, echoing louder with each loop of that clip. The humiliation at the hall had been sharp, but this was worse. It lived now in phones, in pockets, in feeds that would not forget. A private wound made public permanent. The phone buzzed again. This time, not another emoji, but a message. A name appeared at the top. Pastor Williams. My neighbor, the man who had watched me mow the lawn every Saturday, who had greeted me with a nod outside church doors. His words glowed on the screen. "I have something you need to see." Satiome. I stared at the message, the buzzing in my palm suddenly louder than the silence of the house. "Meet me tomorrow." I have the full recording. Position Pastor Williams's text had kept me awake through most of the night. By morning, my eyes felt heavy, yet something inside me hummed with restless energy. I drove across Charleston's quiet streets, the spring air still damp with dew. The church stood at the corner of Sycamore and Main, its white steeple cutting into the pale sky. Bells were silent, but the wooden door gave way to the scent of old hymnals and wax polish. He greeted me in his office, a modest room lined with worn books and framed photos of baptisms, weddings, and Sunday gatherings. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Sit," he said, pulling out his phone. His hands were steady, eyes clear. "You need to see this." On the small screen, the scene replayed, but not Sophie's cropped version. This was whole, uncut, undeniable. I watched myself approach the family table, the chair waiting. I saw Sophie's hand grip the back, her eyes flicked toward the crowd, and then, sharp, deliberate, the yank. The camera caught it from an angle the reception guests hadn't noticed. My fall, my struggle to rise, Sophie's crocodile tears, it was all there, unfiltered. My throat tightened. For hours I had carried the question, did I imagine it? Was humiliation making me exaggerate? But now the truth stared back at me in high definition. My breath shook as I leaned back, feeling both vindicated and hollow. "So I wasn't losing my mind," I whispered. Pastor Williams folded his arms, his voice low but firm. "No, you were targeted." He let the words settle, as heavy as church bells. "And now you have proof." I looked again at the video, the way Sophie feigned shock, the way Daniel rushed to her side while I stood alone. The memory burned, but here was evidence stronger than memory. It wasn't just my word against hers anymore. Aggression placed the phone on the desk between us, his gaze steady. "Patience, Ed. Evidence speaks louder than outrage. If you lash out now, you'll be dismissed as bitter." But if you wait, this recording will do the speaking for you. Me like scripture, both comforting and daunting. For the first time since the wedding, I felt the ground beneath me solid again. Not triumph, not yet, but the certainty that I wasn't crazy, that my dignity had not been an illusion. I closed my eyes briefly, hearing the faint hum of the church organ through the walls, the muffled chatter of a group preparing flowers in the sanctuary. Life outside went on, unaware of the quiet war igniting here. Relinquent them, Pastor Williams leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Are you ready for the storm this will bring? Son, did you really see nothing? Daniel's apartment smelled faintly of roasted coffee and new paint, the kind of city place that tries hard to look lived in. He opened the door with a sheepish smile, but there was something behind his eyes, a flicker of unease he couldn't hide. Sophie was already inside, draped across the sofa in a silk blouse, one hand toying with her necklace, the other clutching her phone as if it were both shield and weapon. Tay stepped across the threshold slowly, every line of my body stiff with the weight of questions I hadn't stopped asking myself. I wanted to believe my son had seen, had noticed, had understood the truth that had played out in front of everyone. But when I spoke the words, his eyes darted away. Dad, Daniel began, his voice low. The wedding, it was hectic. I didn't see everything. He rubbed his hands together nervously, as though trying to erase the memory. Sophie leaned forward, perfect timing, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. He hates me, Daniel, she said, her voice breaking. From the very start, your father has hated me. I was just trying to help, and now he's inventing things. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders trembling with just the right measure of performance. I felt the air tighten in my chest. Inventing? I asked quietly, though the calm in my tone was sharper than any shout. I was there, Sophie. I know what happened. She looked up then, lashes wet, voice trembling with wounded sweetness. And I know what I felt. Hatred, judgment, rejection. I've tried, Daniel. God knows I've tried. But your father... She let the words hang, heavy and poisonous. Daniel shifted in place, torn between the father who had raised him and the woman now crying in his arms. He moved toward her, hesitating only a fraction before she clung to him, her face pressed to his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, awkward, guilty, but he did not push her away. The sight carved into me deeper than the fall at the wedding. There he was, my son, holding her while she shot me a glance over his shoulder, a glance that stripped me bare, as if to say, you're already the outsider. Her smile was small, cruel, and victorious. I stood still, my voice caught behind clenched teeth. Daniel whispered, Dad, maybe we should just take some time. I nodded once, not trusting my words. My feet carried me to the door without thought, each step heavier than the last. But as I reached for the handle, something caught my eye. The soft glow of his laptop screen left open on the dining table. A group chat window stretched wide, filled with colorful icons and words scrolling upward. My gaze froze on Sophie's last message. And just like that, I made his father lose face in front of everyone. Emojis shimmered in the screen's light as if mocking me again. Crearge, the old wooden chair, still waited. Autobay smelled of oil and dust, the air heavy with years of labor pressed into every corner. The workbench sagged under the weight of tools I'd carried through decades, their handles worn smooth by my hands. And there against the wall sat the chair. Its paint had long faded, a soft gray now instead of the rich oak it once was, but it was still solid, still whole. I reached out and let my palm rest against the backrest, the wood cool and steady beneath my fingers. The chair carried me backward through time, to a summer afternoon when Daniel was only 6. The sun had poured through the open garage door, spilling over his small frame as he perched on a toolbox, legs too short to touch the ground. Dad, can I sit next to you while you work? His voice had been eager, pure. I remember glancing at him, at those wide eyes that seemed to hold the whole world, and thinking he deserved more than just a makeshift seat. So I found the leftover planks, the bent nails, the tin of varnish that had barely enough left. I measured clumsily, sawdust rising with every cut, my hands blistering with the labor. But I shaped that chair for him. Every strike of the hammer had felt like a promise, every sanding stroke a prayer that he would always have a place beside me. When I painted it, the brush dragged streaks of blue, the only paint I had left from patching the porch. He sat in it that evening, his legs swinging back and forth, his small hands clutching a wrench far too heavy for him. "This one, right?" he had asked, straining to lift it. I laughed then, a deep laugh that carried warmth instead of bitterness, and guided his hand. "That one's for me. You'll grow into it." And he did. Time after time, he sat in that chair, passing me bolts, asking about engines, his voice mixing with the hum of the radio and the squeal of rusted parts. The chair was never just wood. It was belonging. It was proof that a father and son could share space in a world that often tried to push them apart. And now, standing here decades later, I couldn't stop the image of Sophie's polished hand ripping a different chair away from me, the deliberate cruelty of it. One chair built to lift me closer to my son, another yanked to throw me down. The contrast sliced deep. I tightened my grip on the wood until my knuckles whitened. My reflection in the garage window looked back, older, scarred but unbroken. I lowered myself onto the old wooden chair, its legs groaning slightly under the weight, and sat there until the ache in my bones eased. The seat didn't betray me. It never had. The silence of the garage pressed in, but this time it felt less like loneliness and more like resolve. My hand brushed the grain of the chair one last time, as if to draw strength from it. The past had steadied me before. It would steady me again. I leaned forward, whispering into the stillness, "This time, I won't stay down." A week later, Sophie invited me to another dinner. Charleston evenings carried the kind of warmth that seeped into your bones, but inside the restaurant, the air was cooled, polished, rehearsed. Chandeliers dripped light onto white tablecloths. Waiters moved like shadows in pressed uniforms, and the walls shimmered with the quiet language of money. Sophie had chosen the place carefully. Every detail seemed to whisper that this was her domain, not mine. Daniel rose awkwardly when I arrived, adjusting his collar as if caught between duty and discomfort. Sophie greeted me with a smile that barely touched her eyes. She leaned in with the kind of embrace people use when they want an audience to see their generosity. "So glad you could make it," she cooed, her hand brushing mine, cold as marble. We sat, the three of us, at a table near the center where every laugh, every gesture could be seen. Sophie ordered the wine without asking, her nails tapping against the menu like a conductor setting tempo. Daniel remained quiet, folding his napkin over and over, his silence a weight between us. As the plates arrived, Sophie's words slipped in with the same precision as the silverware. "Daniel tells me you've slowed down at the garage. Must be difficult, feeling like you're not as useful anymore." She tilted her head sweetly, her tone wrapped in silk, but the barbs underneath struck deep. I chewed slowly, keeping my eyes steady on her. "I manage," I said, my voice even. My son shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. Sophie's smile widened, satisfied with his silence. She leaned closer to him, her perfume drifting across the table like smoke. "Don't worry, darling," she whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "Not everyone can keep up forever. That's why we build new lives, isn't it?" The fork stilled in my hand. I saw it clearly then. She wasn't just mocking me. She was chiseling at the bond between father and son, brick by brick, trying to carve out a space where I no longer belonged. Daniel rubbed the back of his neck, his lips pressed tight, unwilling or unable to confront her words. His silence was worse than any insult. Tied through the clink of glasses and the murmur of nearby tables, Sophie kept circling back to the same refrain. Too old, too tired, too late. She never said the words outright, but they hung in the pauses, in the way her gaze slid over me like I was furniture gathering dust. I didn't fight her, not then. I let her talk, let her weave the illusion of control, while inside me the memory of the old wooden chair stood firm. She could strip me of a seat at her table, but not of my place in the truth. As dessert menus arrived, I excused myself, stepping outside into the humid Charleston night. The air felt thick, but freer than inside. My phone buzzed in my pocket, its glow cutting through the dark. Pastor Williams' voice was urgent, steady, when I answered. "Ed, you need to come tomorrow." Others saw, too, pressed against my chest like a promise. Not everyone stayed silent that night. The Arlen. The coffee shop was the kind of place that kept its lights low and its music lower, china clinking softly, a grinder purring in the corner, the smell of cinnamon folded into the air. Pastor Williams chose a table by the window, where the morning light broke into squares across the wood. He rose when I came in, his hand warm around mine, the lines at his eyes deepening with concern and resolve. Wu people were already seated with him, a woman with a cardigan folded neatly over her shoulders and a man in a sport coat that fit like he'd borrowed it. They stood when I did, as if this meeting needed manners to steady it. The woman offered a careful smile. "We were there," she said. The man nodded, eyes flitting to Pastor and back to me. "We saw what happened." We sat. Cups arrived and steam between us. The woman spoke first, fingers wrapped around the porcelain as if to keep them from trembling. "I was facing the family table when it happened," she said. "I saw your daughter-in-law put her hand on the chair. She didn't lose her grip. She pulled, deliberately." She swallowed. "I should have said something right then." "I didn't." The man cleared his throat. "I'm not proud of it either. Weddings make people behave like the truth is a guest who didn't RSVP. I told myself it wasn't my place." He looked at me squarely. "But it is now." I listened without interrupting. There was a steadiness that came over me, like a board set true under a level. "Thank you," I said, "because gratitude is the first plank of any bridge worth crossing. If you're willing later, I may need your statements." "We're willing," the woman said at once. "Say when." The man nodded again. "I can put it in writing. Dates, time, where we were seated." Pastor's eyes warmed with approval. "You see," he said softly, "the story is wider than a single camera angle." We talked details. Where they had stood when the quartet paused, how Sophie's hand tightened just before she yanked the chair, how her mouth made a small shape of triumph before she remembered to open it into shock. The woman admitted she had started to rise, then sat when the room laughed. "It's ugly what fear can do," she whispered. "I told myself I'd make it worse. I told myself someone else would speak." The man tapped the table with one finger, a metronome of regret. "I have a mother," he said. "She's 79 and proud. If someone did that to her—" He let the sentence trail away, the end of it already spoken by the muscle in his jaw. "I can't be a bystander twice." Pastor slid a small notepad across the table. We exchanged numbers, agreed on what we had seen, what could be sworn to if it came to that. The air felt different afterward, lighter, not because the burden was gone, but because it was no longer mine alone to carry. Outside, the day had sharpened into bright noon, cars flashing by like ideas none of us would have time to consider. I sat back and let the murmur of the cafe wash over us. There is a peculiar comfort in witnesses, the way their memories align with your own, the way their words shore up the ground beneath your feet. It wasn't triumph I felt. Triumph has sharp edges. This was something steadier, a patient tightening of bolts. Pastor watched me carefully. "This isn't just about clearing your name," he said. "It's about naming what happened. That's how harm loses its hiding places." He let the sentiment rest, then added, almost gently, "It will also make you a target again." I knew he was right. People like Sophie never retreat quietly. They change settings. They change tactics. A chair in a ballroom, a joke in a toast, a cut clip online, each a different key for the same lock. The woman across from me nodded as if she'd followed my thought. "It all spreads so fast now," she said. "One tap and strangers are laughing in rooms you'll never enter." "Disillusioned media makes bravery cheap," the man said, "and cruelty cheaper." He sipped his coffee and made a face. "Cold." We rose to leave. On the sidewalk, the spring sun warmed my shoulders, and I let it. The pastor clasped my forearm, a soldier's grip, not a clergyman's. "You aren't alone," he said, and the words settled exactly where the ache had lived since the reception. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I almost didn't look. I wanted to hold that single clean breath a moment longer. But habit is a stubborn hand. I glanced down at the screen and felt the warmth drain from my face. Soflating a new clip, this time a grandpa meme. I sat with the chair, the house creaking, Facebook buzzing. The wooden chair in my garage had been with me for decades, its grain worn smooth by small hands that once clutched its edges, legs that dangled without reaching the floor. Tonight, though, I pulled it into the living room, next to the old lamp with its frayed cord. The house settled around me, wood sighing like an old body remembering every storm. The night was silent except for the faint ping of notifications from my phone, cutting through the quiet like needles. I scrolled, comment after comment under Sophie's new post, strangers and relatives alike piling on with their little yellow faces twisted into laughter. Words like doddering, clumsy, should have stayed home, swam across the screen. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years left a row of emojis, tears streaming from eyes, as though my fall were the funniest thing they'd seen all week. Each reaction landed like a pebble thrown at a window, not shattering it, but reminding me how fragile the glass was. The lamp threw a circle of light across the chair. I reached out, running my fingers along the backrest, remembering the day I built it for Daniel. He was 6 and insisted he needed a seat to work with Dad in the garage. I cut and sanded the wood until blisters rose on my palms, painted it with the last coat of porch blue I had left in the can. His little legs had swung beneath it while he handed me wrenches too heavy for his wrists. That chair had held him steady, given him a place beside me in a world too big for a child. Tonight, it steadied me again. The screen glowed. My reflection shimmered faintly against Sophie's words, warped by glass and LED. My face, lined and weary, hovered over the cruel captions. I could almost hear Maria's voice cutting through them, as if she'd been sitting across from me all along. "Don't let pride make you reckless, Gus," she used to say. But more often, when life pressed too hard, "Don't let fear make you small." I closed my eyes, letting her memory breathe in the room. The way she'd rest her hand on mine during storms, grounding me with a single touch. The scent of her hair after rain, the strength she carried in silence, a strength that built the spine of our family long before Daniel could walk. Losing her had hollowed me, but tonight her voice filled that hollow again. I looked down at my scarred hands, knuckles swollen from years of tightening bolts, palms traced with the map of my labor. These hands had held Maria, raised Daniel, rebuilt engines, and kept food on the table. They weren't clumsy hands, they weren't weak. They were honest, and they still had work to do. The comments kept rolling in, but the sting dulled. Something firmer rose beneath it. Not rage, not despair, but resolve. Silence had been my shield for too long, and Sophie counted on it. She thrived on the assumption that an old man would bow his head, take his seat in the corner, and let her rewrite the story. But I had carried brothers through fire in the desert. I had carried my wife through her last breath. I had carried my son's childhood on my back. I knew how to carry this too. I set the phone on the table, the buzzing still faint against the wood, and I whispered into the quiet, "Tomorrow I won't be silent." The house seemed to lean in, listening. The chair held my weight, as if it had been waiting for that vow. And then the phone lit up again, brighter this time, the screen filling with new words that froze the air around me. Sophie had made her post public. "Dad, maybe she just doesn't know better." Kang stirred his coffee as though the swirl of cream might reveal some answer he hadn't yet found. The cafe was bright with morning light, the windows fogged slightly from the steam of dozens of cups, but between us the air was heavy. He had called me here, asked for time away from Sophie, away from the noise. His voice was low, almost apologetic, as if he were speaking to two people at once, his father and his wife, and trying not to betray either. I let the silence stretch, spoon untouched in my hand. I'd learned long ago that sometimes the best way to coax truth from a man is to give him space to fill the quiet. Daniel shifted in his seat, eyes darting toward the door as though she might burst in at any moment. "She didn't mean it," he tried again. "She gets nervous, Dad. Weddings, family, it's a lot of pressure." My throat tightened, but I kept my tone even. Pressure doesn't make someone yank a chair from under another human being. His gaze flickered to mine, then away. "You were right there, Daniel. Did you see it with your own eyes?" The question landed like a weight between us. He froze, lips parting but no words escaping. The clatter of cups and plates around us filled the pause. Waiters moved briskly, conversations hummed, but none of it touched our table. Daniel's hands trembled faintly, as he wrapped them around the cup, knuckles whitening. I could almost see the conflict pulling him apart, the loyalty to his wife, the memory of the moment, the shame of not stepping in. He swallowed hard. I don't know what to believe anymore. His voice cracked on the last word. It was not just doubt, it was exhaustion. The sound of a man caught between two lives, neither of which felt safe to claim. I reached across the table, my hand resting close enough for him to take if he wanted, but he didn't. He looked at me with eyes that still held the boy I'd raised, yet clouded now with fear of losing the woman he thought he loved. The weight of it pressed on my chest. I could not make the choice for him, but I could refuse to let him sink into denial. You don't have to choose between truth and love, I said quietly, but you do have to look at both honestly. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. The silence was its own confession. My phone buzzed on the table, screen lighting up with a name I recognized immediately. Pastor Williams. The message was short, urgent. We'll show the video at the reception. Another reception. Same hall, but the air was different. New days. The chandeliers still shimmered, glasses still clinked. But beneath the surface, there was an unease, like the room itself remembered what had happened the last time we gathered here. I stayed near the back, quiet, letting Sophie shine in her chosen spotlight. She laughed too loudly, raised her glass too often, her words sharpened with a polish only some guests failed to notice. Each smile carried a barb meant for me. Daniel kept close to her, stiff in his posture, glancing my way but never long enough to linger. He was caught in a storm he couldn't name. And me? I had decided to let the storm run its course. Pastor Williams moved through the crowd with the calm assurance of a man on a mission. He caught my eye only once, a subtle nod. I felt the air shift. The time had come. Sophie tapped her glass with a silver fork, drawing attention once more. We should thank everyone again, she began sweetly, but her eyes flicked toward me, venom hidden beneath the sugar. Even those who had trouble keeping their balance. A ripple of nervous laughter spread, thin and uncomfortable. Then the pastor's voice cut across the hall, steady and firm. May I have a moment? He lifted his phone high, its screen casting a small glow. For a second, confusion rippled. Then the projector flared to life. On the widescreen, silence fell. The uncut video played, Sophie's hand, visible, deliberate, tugging the chair from beneath me, my body collapsing to the marble floor. The gasp of witnesses, the laughter that had followed. This time, there was no escape, no excuse. The hall erupted, not in applause, not in laughter, but in whispers sharp enough to wound. Eyes swung toward her, toward Daniel, toward me. The master of ceremonies fumbled with his notes, lost for words. Sophie stood frozen, her glass trembling in her hand, the mask slipping as the truth blazed across every face in the room. Someone connected the projector to Sophie's own Facebook post. The hall went utterly still. On the widescreen, her carefully edited clip appeared, me falling, frozen in that humiliating pose, followed by strings of laughing emojis. The caption glared across the room. Our family's clumsy old man. Minimized murmur rolled through the guests like a wave. Chairs scraped softly. Faces hardened. The levity Sophie had tried to conjure now twisted back, exposing her cruelty in brutal clarity. Daniel's complexion draped the screen, then at his bride, his lips parting without sound. Every guest could see the truth, not just the stumble, not just the pulled chair, but the intent to mock, to belittle, to reduce me to a caricature. One woman at the next table gasped aloud. That's cruel. Another voice followed, firmer. How could she post that? The words were no longer whispers but indictments, spreading through the hall faster than the clinking of glasses. I sat still, watching the storm shift directions. For once, I didn't need to defend myself. The evidence was louder than any protest. Sophie's hands shook as she fumbled for words. Her eyes darted from screen to guests, from Daniel to me. Then her voice rose, shrill, desperate. He hates me! But the silence that followed was different now. No one rushed to soothe her. No one believed. Daniel looked at me, tears mixing with shame. Behind the curtain, away from the gasps and murmurs of the hall, his shoulders trembled. He reached for me but stopped halfway, as though unworthy. Dad, I'm sorry. I saw it, I heard it all, but I stayed quiet. I let her convince me you were bitter, that you hated her. I wanted peace so badly I ignored what was right in front of me. Glass under pressure, I felt years of restraint in them, the silence of a son torn between loyalty and truth. I placed a steady hand on his arm. Son, you need to learn to see. Not just what you're told, not just what you want to believe. Look with your own eyes, stand with your own heart. That's how a man finds his way. He broke then, falling into my arms. His grip was desperate, but his voice was stronger. No more silence. I'll stand for the truth, with you. For the first time that night, I felt the fracture begin to mend between us. Not with easy words, but with resolve born from pain. When we stepped back, breath ragged but steadier, I glanced toward the hall. The crowd still buzzed, voices clashing like waves against stone. And there, her seat empty, her veil discarded on the table, Sophie was gone. Her heels clicked the hall. The sound faded quickly, swallowed by whispers. Guests shifted in their chairs, avoiding one another's eyes. Some murmured excuses and slipped toward the doors, while others stayed, their gazes drawn to me, not with mockery this time, but with something heavier, something closer to respect. Todd Daniels stood beside me, jaw clenched, eyes following the space Sophie had abandoned. His silence wasn't weakness now, it was choice. Pastor Williams stepped forward through the dispersing crowd. He reached for my hand, gripping it with the firm weight of brotherhood. You stood tall, brother, he said quietly, yet the words carried through the hush like a benediction. For the first time that night, I let out a slow breath. The hall was wreckage, flowers wilting, glasses half-drained, music silenced, but in that ruin, something had been rebuilt. Use creaked in the settling night. I walked into the garage where the old wooden chair still waited, dust catching the thin strip of moonlight. I laid my hand on its worn backrest. My reflection in its polish wasn't the man on the floor anymore. The chair had held me once. Tonight, it would again. Therapy, the old chair creaked as I sat. The garage smelled of sawdust and oil, the sense of a life spent with my hands. Daniel stood in the doorway, shoulders heavy, eyes locked on the worn piece of wood that had outlived decades. This is the chair? He asked softly. I nodded. I built it when you were 6. You wanted a place beside me while I worked. Your legs barely reached the floor. His lips trembled and he moved closer. I should have remembered more than I did. I should have remembered you. The apology was rough, scraped raw by shame. I ran a hand across the grooves, scars of time embedded in the grain. You don't forget love, son. Sometimes it just gets buried under noise, but it waits. Read himself into the chair. It groaned but held. His eyes met mine, wet but resolute. I want to sit here again. Not just tonight, I want to stand with you. Between us, fragile yet unbreakable. The distance was gone. Foreground, I reached under my shirt, fingers brushing the wedding band that had rested against my chest all these years. Maria's memory warmed my palm. I thought of her smile, her faith, her promise that love could outlast cruelty. And in that quiet, I whispered inwardly, you were right. I won't be humiliated in silence. The words left my lips, steady and unshaken, echoing through the quiet sanctuary. Sunlight streamed through the stained glass windows, scattering colors across the pews, where neighbors, friends, and even strangers leaned forward to hear. Pastor Williams had offered me the pulpit, and I had climbed the steps slowly, every joint aching but every step firm. I told him what had happened, not with bitterness, not with blame. I spoke of a chair pulled from beneath me, of laughter that stung sharper than any wound, of a voice cut off mid-sentence. I spoke of a bride's cruelty, but also of the silence that followed. The silence of those who saw and did nothing. My hands gripped the lectern, not to hold myself up, but to steady the truth as it carried into every ear. Take, I'm 62, I said, and I have scars from war, from work, from years of carrying burdens alone. But the deepest scars are carved when dignity is stripped and no one speaks. We must not allow silence to protect cruelty. We must not allow laughter to excuse humiliation. The congregation shifted, nods spreading like ripples across water. I saw Daniel rise from the pew, his shoulders squared, his eyes wet. He came to stand beside me, not as a boy ashamed of his father, but as a man choosing to be proud of him. The applause began softly, then grew. Not for revenge, not for spectacle, but for truth spoken without fear. I felt the weight lift, the years of quiet endurance breaking open into something freer. As the clapping filled the church, I lifted my gaze. Sunlight poured brighter through the glass, striking the far wall where a shadow looked for a moment like the outline of that old wooden chair. In memory, I saw Daniel's small legs swinging, Maria's soft smile nearby. And I knew then the circle had closed. The chair was never gone, neither was I. In the end, the cruel laughter that once filled a wedding hall was silenced by the undeniable weight of truth. What began as humiliation and betrayal turned into a reckoning that restored dignity, exposed deceit, and mended a bond thought lost. Justice may arrive late, but it always arrives, echoing like a verdict no one can overturn. Sometimes it only takes one clear voice to remind a community never to look away from injustice. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts below. Type 1 if you resonate with this story.